Hey, okay, this is the third video, and it's the last of the series, building up this simple application. Um, so now that we've got the post method on the API, which looks like this, um, and we run it. We are getting a random adjective plus a random animal and our numbers. So that's great. That's what we want. So now we'll go ahead and flesh out this the presentation or the view, add the form elements, and then we can use it to push data to the background. Or the back end, rather. All right, so let's take a look at our home route, or the home view, that is. And we should add title, naturally. It's a random username generator. And we are going to add a select here, and we're going to use Bootstrap's select. And so a select is the element, or is the HTML element that gives you a drop down, or you can also have them where you can select multiple like this. We obviously just want one, so I'll just copy this, and we will and we'll add it here. Beautify, save, refresh. Okay, so better get that. And so here's the select menu, and it's got the default options. And but now we want to do a couple things. We want to provide a set of options that the user can choose from for picking the city that they want the weather to get the weather from to use in the username. And but we also will need this on the back end, because we're going to need access to some of that data. And so what we're only sending is from the front end to the back end is this value, this number that tells the API what option to use, so that it knows what weather to get from the API. So let's put this inside of a single file called let's call it locations. And I've already got this file built, and I think it would be a lot easier if you just go and copy this from the finished repository. If you're building this, it looks like this. And so it's a standard module, right? Standard npm module, and it exports a field or variable called cities. And this is an array, and there's the whole object, and it's an array of objects, and each object looks the same. It has a city that's a string, and has a latitude and longitude. And I went ahead and pre-populated these so that they'd be ready. And so what we're going to do is, because this file is located within the whole project, we can actually import this file and use it in the app and the API, but we can also use it when we construct the view and the front end down here. So in order to make data accessible within a view, in the same way that the handlebars works like this, what we need to do is in the route, on the endpoint for where we actually render the view, we need to, well, we no longer need the random number for the cat, and we will just do a quick test here. Hello from the route. Okay, and so just to remind ourselves what this looks like, we are rendering, when somebody goes to the home page, we're rendering the home view and passing in this object full of variables that we can then access from within the view itself. So if I was to say, just, I don't know, down here, I could say div, and then I'll say 2 open curly braces in the word title, and then save and refresh. And now we've got access to that text that was passed in when the route rendered the view. So, but what we really want is to loop through all the options in our locations file and build up the each option, both its value and its text. Okay, so to do that, we'll delete the old ones, and then we'll come here, and the format basically looks like this. You can, inside of handlebars, you can use something called each. And this is when handlebars is rendering, when the template engine is rendering, it when it sees this hash each, and you pass a variable that you pass in the route, then it'll loop through each item inside of an array. And then this is the end of the each. And so as just a test, we can loop through the index, which is the index in the array that we're looping through. So 0 through 4 or 5. I think there are 4. Well, there are 5 and index 0, so there are 4. And then you can loop through, and by using this, you can refer to the value at the index. So this refers to the object, and city is the, as you recall, is the text here. So we'll just do, and I'll go ahead and wrap this in, I'll type it here, in an option field. And so we need the index as the value that gets passed to the server, and the city as the visible option. So while there are, so we're going to loop through all the cities, and we're going to put the index of the loop of the item here in the value, and the string of the object city in each one. And so then finally, to finish that piece out, we need to pass that in right here. And so we'll say cities, and then we need to actually require it up there at the top. And so this will be locations and locations. So locations is the variable we're storing the module in, and then but we're actually passing the cities variable in there. So I'll refresh this, and whoops, got an error. Let's see what we got. Module not found. Well, I probably made that same mistake I made in the last video, which is that locations is actually inside of the data directory. And so yeah, so there it is. So, and we can inspect this to see exactly what happened here. And so as I said, we loop through each of the 4 options inside of the locations object, and the index is accessible via this this at index, and then this dot city refers to the string that is the city name. And then let's replace this text with, let's see, something like use my weather. All right. And so, and then we need to give the an ID to the select so that we know how to reference this, the data that comes in from there. We'll use the city index. And then the area label, we'll use that. Okay, so now when we submit the form, when the user submits the form, the form data that is passed, just like we did in Postman, the form data city index will contain the value of the chosen option. And so right now we're not getting the weather, but we're going now that we have now that we know which weather to get, we're about to hook that up. So to test this, what we can do is we can go into the routes, and the form data comes in from the to the route from the request. And so so down here, what we need to do is so remember, it's going to be submitting to the post method. It'll submit via the post method to this route. And so the form data comes in, just like I pointed out here, that it comes in as URL encoded data via the body. And so Express packages takes care of all the headers and parses everything into real objects and deserializes them all for us. And so it will come in via the request.body. And so we can log this when it comes in. So so let's now do a test here, and get the terminal back up. Okay, so right now it says use my weather, and if I click generate, it says undefined. And if I choose an option and click generate, it still says undefined. So yes, of course. So the problem is that the body is not yet defined in Express, and in order to do that, we have to add something into the main app. And it's the first time in this whole second or third video that we're going to touch the app. And in the app, we have to add a body parser, and so the body parser will look for any form data that comes in the body, and it will parse it by deserializing it, changing it from text and string data to an actual object in JavaScript that we can then use by saying request.body. In this case, city index. So, so the first thing we have to do is here. I'll go up and install it. So it's the body parser. So npm install body-parser, and it will install, and cool. So we're good there. So let's go ahead and create an object for the body parser and require body parser, and now we will we'll use the body parser to take the body data that comes in and convert it to JSON. And so we saw this same thing happen when we this is just a method that will either decode or encode JSON data, and where did we see this? Let's see, I think it was in the routes. So this is where we send JSON data back as a response. But then if we look at the way that we used, we'll use it here in a second. I know where we're going to use it. And so this will take the body data and make it available as a JSON object. And then this one is also required to use to use URL encoded data. And so it's body parser URL encoded, and we have to pass it an object in order to set extended to true. And what this does is, so this will extract the body of the incoming request as JSON, and this will get all of any URL encoded data, including hierarchical data as well. And so once this is running, now we can go back and the body parser will, if we click generate, the body parser will parse the string of data and store it inside of an object, inside of the request.body object, and then we can access the variables that come in from the form data. So here we can see our city index, and recall that we were going to test it, if somebody hadn't submitted something, we were going to test to see if it was null, and right now it's null no matter what, but we'll fix that here in a second. Okay, so we'll move the app over here. Actually, we're done with it, and or I think we are. Let me just check my notes here. Yeah, so there's the request, and the routes comes in, and so at this point it should, let's see, we might need to add the next here. I'll explain what that does in another video. So it indeed says that a post was received and that the city index is null. So let's walk back here. So request.body should works, and it includes city index, but for some reason it's null even when the value is correct. And so I'm sure there's some detail that I missed here, and I'm just going to find it real quick. Nice border collie. Let's see. Okay, so it took me a second, but I found the error, it's recall that when you submit the form on the front end, the submit button or the submit method is called here, and in the callback function we create the body object in order to add it into the request object. However, at this point we need to add a little bit of logic so that we can then determine if we should update the body object with the data that comes from that field. So we don't want to send just any data, and so we're going to send we're only going to send data if it's not a NaN, which is so we're basically saying if it's not a number. So only if it's a number will we send this data. So we're gonna use jQuery to get the data from the city index field, its value, that is, and then If it is not a number, then we will store the value inside of body.cityIndex. And now, when body is stringified and attached to the body of the request and sent to the server, it will work. And so I'll click generate, and it's null, which is what we expect because we haven't chosen anything. But then when we choose something and we click generate, it's 0, and now it's 2 because that's the 0, 1, 2 index of the list. So that's working great. The only thing I'd like to do now is to, instead of sending the form data as a string, I'd like to go ahead and wrap it in the number function, which basically takes it from string data, and I need to refresh this, and converts it to a real number. And so you can see here, the body on the API says city index 2, but it's a string. And so what I want is that it's a real number. And you can see that this one isn't wrapped inside of the string. Okay, so so now we have the data coming in from the server, and or from the front end, and so we now need to contact the API on the back end. So let's head over to, we're going to do this inside of the generator, and recall that that this is the piece right here that took care of the that generated the username, right? And so, but what we're going to do is, if we receive that data, if we receive a city index, then we're going to change what we send back, and instead of sending an adjective and animal, we're going to send the weather, an animal, and the temperature. So to just continue connecting the front end to the back end, we'll inside of the route, we're going to get the request.body.cityIndex, and we'll send that to the function generate username, and then in here we will receive it as a parameter. And so now we'll have, and we can test just to make sure we have city index, and a lot of times I'll wrap the variable name inside of a string like this, and then use a comma, and then I can hit save and run it, and whoops, and then hit refresh, and we can see that city index and then city index again is showing up right there. And I'm going to get rid of this because we've tested that enough, and that we know that that works good. Okay, so now we have a couple of decisions to make about like where we store the data that we're going to use, and so here's something that I like to do. I think it leaves the code a little cleaner. If I make this bigger, you can see that it's actually not as ugly as it looks. But I'm just doing this so I can see the console at the same time. But notice that we store the adjective, the animal, and the number all up here at the top, and then we return them all down here. So what we're going to do is we're going to add the logic that determines if the city index came in, and it's not null, and it's greater to or equal to 0, and we'll add the logic there, and then if all that's true, we'll get the data, and then we'll just write over these values. And so at the bottom, we're always going to return this but by the time you get down to the bottom, it may have changed. And to keep these a little more, I guess, agnostic or not too specific to, so that they can change and it doesn't feel so bound to the original application, I'm going to change it from animal to noun. So let noun, and it's still getting an animal right now, but it might be replaced later on. And then adjective is the first one, and you know what? I changed my mind. I'm gonna leave animal because that's what we're doing, and I'm gonna leave adjective. I'm gonna leave the way it is. It's fine. You know, what's important is that you can look at it and read it and understand it. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about try and catch now. I talked about them before. So you can apply a try catch situation to any function. I'm going to wrap these and I'm going to type curly braces, and then I'm going to put the try before. So all this will be tried, and then catch error, and then console.error down here, and then beautify. Clean it all up. Okay, so, and the reason I'm going to do this is because, you know, errors happen, especially when you're using data from all these different sources, and but I'm also doing it because I'm going to use the catch method in the as an alternate in the fetch if fetch doesn't return a city for some reason from their API, then we'll have a catch to deal with the problem then. So first let's check to see if city index exists, if it is not null, and if it is greater than or equal to 0. So if these are both true, then we will we're going to say something like, I don't know, console.log getting the weather. Just a note here, so we can manage the state and the logic. We can see the state and the logic of our application behind the scenes. We can see it all happening here and just know that that the reason, like if something's not working, we can see the reason could just be logic, or, you know, if the data is not coming in correctly. Basically I use console log all the time when I'm building up an application, and then I go through after it's done and I just comment it all out or delete them. It's a great tool for debugging. Okay, so in order to, as I mentioned earlier, in the second video, to get the API data or to get the weather data for a location, you first have to get the metadata and the forecast URL using the latitude and longitude. And in the locations document, I've already got the latitude and longitude, so that's great. So we need to bring that in, and so I'll go into routes where I've already got the code that brings it in, and I'll go and put it in the generator now. So now we've got access to our locations, and we're going to do this. We'll say we're going to make a variable called forecast URL, and we're going to set it equal to, well, wait, before we do that, let's go ahead and write the function. Come down here, and we are going to make an async function called get weather forecast URL. And for this, we need the latitude and the longitude of the city that we want the weather from. And so this is just basically a wrapper for a fetch call. We're going to fetch the data, and we're going to return the results of the fetch. So I'll say return fetch And then the full string is, here, I'll just copy it right here. Yeah. So it's https://api.weather.gov/points, that's the endpoint, plus the lat, plus a comma, plus the launch. All right. I could have written this a little bit prettier. For fun, why don't we go ahead and do that? So I'll just, I'm gonna delete all this and show you a slightly prettier way to write this with a backtick. It's also, the backtick can also be used to write strings, but you don't have to concatenate with them. You can insert data directly in them with a $sign and a curly brace. So lat, comma, launch. And so it's a little shorter, a little prettier, a little more readable, really. Okay, so once that happens, we are going to, we're going to say then, dot, we're going to just chain in a bunch of statements to handle what happens. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add an error checker into here. And it's an error checking mechanism that we're going to reuse, and we're going to put it inside of our functions document. And essentially it looks like this: exports, because it's in the functions module, handle errors, and we're going to take the response object, and inside of the statement block, we will look to see if the response, remember that we're contacting an API and then we're getting a response back, and fetch returns this response object, and there's a field in it called OK. And if that is not true, then we will throw an error using the throw error object in JavaScript, and we'll post and we'll throw the error. It'll just be the status text from the response, and then we'll return the response regardless. So what happens is if the response is okay, which should be 100% of the time, this piece will never happen. It'll just return the response. And so I'll save that, come over here, and now inside of, remember it's inside the functions module, so I can just say functions dot handle errors. And now I've got basically an error handler built in for any fetch call that I make. And so I could say, I'm done with that. I could say, I could add more things to this. I could do things based on errors, and it's just it just is going to throw that error. And so, so instead of the application failing silently and not doing anything, we can do something about the error because we know in our code, in our logic, that there is an error. And then we'll do what we have done in other fetch calls, which is that we're going to, we'll convert it to JSON. And so we'll take the response, let's see here. We'll take the response, which is checked in this handle errors, and then pass back. And then we'll convert it to JSON. And then at this point, we've got a JSON object with no errors, basically. We know because it's run through our handle errors function. And then we're going to do a statement block here so that we can log it to just check and make sure everything's kosher. And then we can return JSON properties dot forecast, or, and this is a or null. And so what this says is that just as before, we took the response, we got the JSON data out of the response, we passed the JSON data to the next function in the chain of thens, and we are going to return, if everything was successful, we're going to return the value in this field, in json.properties.forecast. Or if it is null, instead of just erroring because if it looks for something and it's null, it might or it doesn't exist rather, then it will cause an error, and we'll so we can basically, this is called a ternary operator. Basically it says I'm gonna return this unless this doesn't exist, and then I'll return this. So it's kind of like it's basically the OR operator from conditionals, and so it'll return this one unless it doesn't exist, and then return this. And then finally, we're going to use the catch as the very last in the chain. If everything did not work out, we will catch and log the error so we can check it and see if there are any problems. So, oops. There we go. So again, this is an asynchronous function, and it's going to return. It's going to try to get all of the. It's going to try to get the data here and try to return just the forecast. And if it doesn't exist, it'll return null. So if for some reason the city is not listed, which I found out that Anchorage was, for some reason, didn't have a forecast in its data point, probably because it's not in the contiguous United States. This will make sure our API doesn't fail silently or just crash, and we'll deal with the potential null value up here in let forecast URL. And so remember, this is async, so we'll say await get forecast URL, and now we need to I hit return just to keep this clean. Now we need to say locations and recall that the city index is the key. It's the 0 through 4, so it's the index. So locations.cities city index will lat or latitude is going to be the latitude for the current city index that we received. And we could have just stored the latitude in the form, latitude, longitude in the form, and then passed it here. But you know, there are millions of different ways to write programs, and this is just one. So cool. So now we should get the forecast URL, and I'm going to add an error check because we're using await. We can write it. We can write our code in a kind of procedural manner, step by step, in a way, but tap into asynchronous code. So it's easy to write and easy to read and understand what's going on. And we don't have to deal with the callback hell, or the ugly code that callbacks give us. So if the forecast URL is not null, then we will then take that forecast URL and actually get the forecast. Because recall that we have to the first point, you pass in the latitude and longitude, it returns the forecast properties.forecast URL, and then you take that, and then you can send that and actually get the forecast data, which includes the temperature and the prediction. So let's go ahead and log this, and now that we know it exists, and save it, and I'll just I'll run it. We haven't touched the front end, so I don't have to refresh this page, and I'll just hit refresh and go look at our data, and oh, there's an error, and it's the error we kept running into, which is that we're using an npm module without first installing it and requiring it. And so what we need to do is we need to npm install, it's called node fetch, and just want to make sure it's being saved inside of the, yep, there it is, node fetch, being saved inside our package. And then I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to go to the top of the generator where all the other ones are. Const fetch equals require. And I should note, I think I said this before, but I should explain. So, so fetch is available for JavaScript in the browser, but it is not available to Node for some reason, and I'm not sure why. I'll have to look that up. But so we have to use it as we have to use the node fetch npm module and import that. But because I in my JS hint am using, we have told it that we have a browser environment and a Node environment at the same time. It thinks we're redefining it. So, so instead of using const, which is the, I believe, ES6 language that is scope dependent version of a variable declaration, we can just use the old school var and allow it to be, you know, non-scoped, and JS hint will stop bothering us. Okay, so let's save that, and now we can run this again. Oh, we got an error. Oh, I made a mistake here. So when it's a custom module, you have to give the path, which is this information, before you put your stuff. But when it's a built-in module, it npm will look inside your node modules file, and good. So now no errors there, and now I can run this, and indeed, our API is getting data back. So just to recap here. This is basically, this is a really handy function. It's a pattern I use all the time. And I do this so that I can reuse. Sometimes I'll just have an asynchronous function called like get data, and I'll pass the URL into it, and it'll just be a fetch function, and I'll just do all my error handling in here. And, but in any case, what we have now is the ability to go in and get that properties.forecast, and that's what we stored inside of that's what we returned via this function, and it's right there. So now we can, so we hit that API, or we hit the API at that endpoint, and then we return the URL to go get the correct forecast at the grid point. So now here we need to we need to go and do another fetch to get the second one. And so I'm going to, so this one gets the weather forecast URL, and this next one is going to, I'm just going to copy and paste, is going to go get the weather forecast. And we will need to pass in the URL, and then we are basically just going to do the same thing that we did before, but in this case we might have a little bit of cleaning to do. Let me go ahead and set up the fetch, and you will see what I mean. So get fetch, or return the results of our fetch. It's just a get, so we don't have to supply the additional options. We're going to pass the URL that we're receiving, and then we're going to do the same thing we did here, which is to, in fact, I'm just going to copy all of this entire block we can just reuse, and so we'll handle the errors, we'll convert it to JSON, we will log the JSON, and then we're going to return properties.periods. All right, so that's all that's changed there. So now I'm going to run this after I go up here, and I'll say let the let me check my previous code. Yeah, so let's I'll just write forecast for now, equal await get forecast using the forecast URL. And so let's run this, and there we go. So what we see what happened. So we passed in New York, getting the weather. It went out and it got the forecast metadata, and then we got the forecast URL, and then we hit the forecast URL and got the entire forecast for New York City. So we can't yet see the data we want though. So let me drill in just a little bit. We need to return, let's see, we need to log, let's go ahead and log this. So json.properties.periods. So remember, we're in the JSON object.properties.periods, and we're going to get that first period object. So let's go ahead and, because they are, it's an array, and I'll run this again, and it's going to hit the metadata and get the other one. And so now I'm going to turn off that first one, because the first console log in the forecast URL, keep our project clean here. And then we can see that after we get the forecast URL, and then we're logging just the first item in the periods, and we can see there it is, temperature 30 degrees, and the detailed or the short forecast is mostly cloudy. So this one is not very long, but some of these are very long. It'll say partly sunny with a chance of da 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 da. And so what I found is that if we just get the last word of the short forecast, then it is not so messy, and then we can just use that in place of the adjective. And so yeah, so that's what we're going to do now is we're going to we have to write some logic into our get weather forecast, and we're going to, well, we need the word, which will be, you know, cloudy, sunny, etc., and we need the temp, which is going to be a number. And then down here inside of this statement block, we'll just go ahead and run a check just to make sure that we have this. So we make sure we have JSON data, that JSON exists. We'll make sure that JSON.properties exists, and we'll make sure that JSON.properties.periods exists. And then the last one, all these error checks just to make sure, just so our program doesn't fail. Properties.periods.length is greater than 0. So we're making sure that that all of the fields that we need exist, because we're using somebody else's data, and they might not have the data. There may be some kind of issue. The weather lady is taking a nap or something. It's hard to say what's happening. So we're going to make sure all those exist before we try to log them and before we actually use them. So now we'll set, if they exist, now we can set the, here we'll use this one. We're going to get the first one, json.properties.periods.short forecast. And the, whoop, let's clean it up. The temp will be json.temperature. Temperature. Okay, cool. So now we've made sure that they exist and we store them in there. But like I said before, sometimes we have spaces, so we got to get rid of those. So so what we'll do is we'll say if the word where we've stored the weather includes, if the string includes a space, then we are going to set the word equal to, we're gonna basically convert the word into an array by splitting on all the spaces. So so sometimes they look like this. So for example, if it looked like this, it would be an array that had, I don't know, 15 or 20 different indices with each word as an index. So we'll split the word, but then we'll splice. We'll use the chaining function in JavaScript, which is so handy for things like this. We'll splice the index of the -1. That means we'll go from 0, which is the first index, to the we'll go backwards, which actually goes to the very last index. So we're taking the last index of an array created by breaking them apart by spaces, and then we're taking that index, the 0 index of that array that was left over, which I probably could come up with this on my own, but you know, thanks to Stack Overflow and the internet, you can search for, sometimes when you say something like JavaScript, give me the last index of an array or something like that, or give me the last word of a sentence, which is exactly what this one does. Cool. So now we can just double check here that console.log and word and temp are what we expect them to be. And we will run this, getting the weather, and then, yeah, word and temp. And because we're going to store word inside up here, and then we'll, like we do, we'll store it in adjective later on, and so we'll lowercase it then, so I'm not too worried about that. But now I'm going to introduce you to an idea called, in JavaScript, it's called destructuring. And so we have 2 variables that we pulled from this data, and we need to send them both back. And so you have a choice. You can either make 2 calls to the same API, which takes more time, and get those two of them separately, or you could create an object that has multiple pieces in it. Or you could use what's called destructuring, and destructuring allows you to basically you pass an array with word and temp in it, and then the calling function. So we're returning an array with word and temp, which is this cloudy and 30 in this case, and then we can go up here, and then instead of saying let forecast, we can say we'll make 2 new variables, one called weather and one called temp. And so basically this process of destructuring allows us to send an array back and destructure and instantiate 2 new variables at the same time and store the data in them. So we basically allows you to send multiple data fields back from a single one. And so now we've got inside weather and temp, we can, because we've got this far, we know that we're golden actually, and we can send a data object back to the calling function, which again was the route. And so we'll say return, and we're gonna send an object back this time, and we'll use destructuring to get it back. And so return weather and then we'll send the weather to lowercase, oops, and we'll do the, let's see, I just have to remember all the details. Oh, we need the username, which is going to be made up of the weather and the animal, which we built up here. The weather plus the animal plus the temp. And the temp is, in this case, not a string. We don't need to make it lowercase. And then we'll put the temp over here. So this is what we're doing here. So we destructured these two objects coming, or these two fields coming back, and now we're going to return an entire object with username, weather, and temp back out of it. And then semicolon, and then we're going to change. We're going to change this. Instead of just returning the string, which is the username, we're going to do the same thing and return an object back that looks just like the other object, except these are going to be null because we didn't get the weather, because we didn't receive the city index or forecast. All right, so cool. So let's hit save and move this so we can see everything again, and then I'm going to run it from the front end. All right, so we have data here now, but it's the object. Remember, because we just changed it from sending a string back to sending an object back. So we need to change this on the route to, so instead of sending back, instead of building a response like this, and storing it inside the username variable, we're just going to make the response look like this and just store the entire object as the response. And we'll do the same thing up here too. And so what this means is I can come over here now and I can refresh the generate username from the get as a get method, and it's going to return we look at our generator. So here we get adjective, animal, and number, and if none of this is true, if this doesn't run and return the function early, then eventually it will return this. So so this is like a default value if this doesn't happen. I could have also said else and then put this in here, and it would do the same thing. And I think it describes the logic that's happening a little easier. But this is cleaner, requires less code, and as long as I have a return of value up here, I know that the function will return and stop running at this point, and it will never get down to this point. It's a common pattern. Yeah, so this one works. It works as a get, which doesn't matter because we don't really need it anymore. But this still works, but it works as a post whether or not you send the weather. So you can see that in each one of these, the city index is null, and it's generating the occasionally if the name is really long, it wraps everything. And then if I choose weather, we'll send 0, and then it'll go ahead and get the weather, and it looks like it's 38 and rainy in Davidson. And as you might expect, it's going to be sunny and 80 degrees in Hawaii. Cool. Okay, cool. So let's do just a little bit more cleanup on the front end, and I think our project is done. We are going to, inside of our home, we're going to take this last div right here, and we are going to add a weather icon. So I'll change this. We'll give a little vertical space with the class, and I'll say ID equals weather icon. And then I'm going to set the style of it to be just a little bigger, 5M. And then I'll just leave it empty. And then I'm going to go into the main function, or the submit function, and I'm going to add a little bit of logic to once the response is received, then I'll just update the weather icon. So I'll go ahead and create the weather icon variable up here and set it to empty. And then I will, and just like I did in the API, I'll come up here. Well, first of all, let me update the weather icon based on the value of the weather icon. So each time that the submit is called, weather icon is going to be reset to empty, an empty string, and then if we don't change anything in this if statement that we're going to add, then it will delete it. But if JSON.weather doesn't equal null, which is, recall, this this field right here. So if it's null, it's just going to hide whatever we put there. But if it's not null, we'll look to see if it's if it includes the word cloud. And if so, we will set it equal to cloud, which is, don't we do this one? And else, if it includes sun, then we will use this one. Else, if it includes rain, then we will do this one. And if it is null, then it won't change anything, and it'll just delete it. So I'll hit save, come back to our app, and hit refresh. And oh, there's one other thing I wanted to do in the home. Just want to clean up that the input form control. I'm going to change it to form control large, so it's a little bit bigger, and I'll say text center so that it's in the middle. So I hit refresh, and now we'll generate the name. And if it's weather, if we want to use the weather, we'll say generate, and once it comes back, it should have, put that down there. Let me hold down shift and click refresh just in case. Oh, hello, what is this? We have an error. Internal server error at exports handle errors. Oh, so it worked. My error handler worked. That's great. Something is undefined. So the error started on line 52 in routes. This is the stack. This is the stack trace right here. So we can follow these along until we get to our problem. So, and we also tried to log something that's undefined here. So let's go back and look at what happened, and I'll compare it to my to the routes that I built before, and just make sure that that nothing bad happened. So let's see here. I'm going to add a little bit more details to these console logs here, and just so I can try to look for an error. And let's see, I'll do the same thing in the generator. Basically, go find any console logs and just make sure that they tell me what data they were trying to log, and then it's really helpful. All right, so let's try to run this again. Well, it worked that time. I'm sure there'll be an error eventually. There'll be a problem. Let's look at the console here. Uncaught, promised. Yeah, I'm not sure why we had a problem. But in any case, temp, weather, cloudy. Okay, so that all looks good. So why is our icon not showing up here? Let's see. This is going to be inspect. Right here. Weather icon is for some reason not getting inserted. Oh, I know why not. Go into home, and into main, and yeah. So username is an input field, a form field to use val to edit, get or set the data in there. But for a div, you got to use HTML because it's not a form field. You're not changing the value. And so let's try this again. Davidson. Oh, there it is. Rainy. New York. Probably the same. Maybe a little colder. And Anchorage. Let's see if our error checking handles correctly. Yes. So what happened is that there was no, essentially there's just no, like I said, the contiguous United States are the only ones with grid points for some reason. So, but it defaulted to a regular non-weather based username. Okay, well, so that finishes this this kind of sample project. Like I said, it's got all these pieces. The front end that asynchronously connects to the back end and gets data without refreshing. A handlebars project that dynamically inserts data, an API that can give us our information so that the front end can access it, and the connection to the external API that uses that, and lots of error checking, of course. Okay, so there you go.